Good morning, I'm Kevin Freeman. Today is May 15th, 2024. I'm going to drive over to York Village, pick up my friend James Kences, and he and I are going to drive up to Norridgewock to check out the site of the massacre. We're thinking you might like to come along. Our entire trip today will be on Wabanaki land. If you are planning on driving up to the site of the massacre, it would be helpful to know that the site is not in the town of Norridgewock, although it is referred to as the Norridgewock Massacre. The site is in the town of Madison, and it is at Old Point. And here you can see on the map the route that James and I are going to take. We will be getting off the highway at Waterville and going right through Norridgewock and then up to Old Point in Madison.
There you go.
Here comes James.
Yeah,
Hopping down the bunny trail.
Yeah.
There goes James.
I do appreciate that, because I came from a family that was absolutely impatient about that.
You're likely wondering, why would I want to go to Norridgewock with James Kences, the Yorktown historian, and Kevin Freeman, lay student of Native history? Well, James and I have had a long-term fascination with Native history, and especially critical events that have been transitional in colonial New England. The massacre at Norridgewock was carried out by 205 English colonists, many being from York, Maine, then Massachusetts. There is much to consider in this complicated story, and James and I want to explore what we think will be a deeper meaning than the contemporary accounts that we have read. What we do know is that after years of turmoil between the French, English, and natives, a group of men from York went to Norridgewock and killed and scalped about 80 natives, including women and children, and Father Rail, who was a Jesuit priest living with the Norridgewock people. August 12th, 2024 will be the 300th anniversary of this tragic event that destroyed the Norridgewock people. It was reported those not murdered fled east to the Penobscot region or north towards Quebec. All right, so James and I have arrived in Norridgewock, and James hasn't been here before. I've been here several years ago, but I kind of forgot about the layout. So we're going to explore around a little bit, and we're going to take a walk over to the Kennebec River and see if we can find where the massacre actually occurred. Yeah, so here's what they think is the palisade, which was excavated right here, James.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So we're standing right probably where the raid occurred and where Father Rail was murdered.
Well, as I said, we know from the contemporary sources that the natives are being forced into the river, basically to swim into the river.
And they were chased out by the soldiers and clubbed and shot to death. This monument was erected in 1833 and is a tribute to Father Rail. So James and I have made it to Father Rail's obelisk.
Yes.
Yeah.
So there is a cemetery a few hundred feet in front of us, all right?
Yeah.
And a woods to the left, and woods to the right.
Yeah, there's a lot of woods up here.
A lot of woods.
Yeah.
And woods behind the cemetery. Has been pointed out, all the emphasis is placed upon his death.
Yes.
Right.
At that time period.
And no indication of the, the casualties of the natives.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. You know, James, it's interesting, I think, that I see you and I are paying attention to this more so than the monuments that might tribute the natives in a...
Well, in my case, it's because it's such a, as I said, it's represented in very early images, you know.
Right, yeah, you're familiar with it. It's
Right.
it's the popular icon sort of that goes with Norridgewock. But here we're actually doing it because it is so prevalent. Don't you think it's because of its prevalence that we have more to investigate? It's more like, you know, we're walking around it. It looks like this.
You saw what was over there. I mean,
yeah,
these very sparse stone markers there.
Right. So they don't give us much to really reflect on.
I mean, I think that a schematic representation of the region would really help. Which
there was one, but it wasn't comprehensive enough to really show us where we were in reference to it.
You know, the two things always keep in mind are simply trying to envision the topography at the time, which is somewhat of a challenge given the nature of how everything is wooded here. Yeah, so
there were obviously successive cuttings in this area and where the massacre took place.
How extensive was the village in terms of its physical size and all of that?
Yeah, and we're gonna take you down along the Kennebec River and show you some views of the river. We think we've been walking on what might have been an old trade path, or maybe it was a railroad track at one time, following the riverbed. Yeah, so we're on the Kennebec River now, downriver a little bit from where the massacre likely took place. Are we certain, James, that we're below the massacre site?
As I said, I wouldn't be able to be certain on that.
Yeah, we don't quite know how big the village was, so in that archaeology report, the dissertation by, who was that by?
Pam Crane.
Pam Crane. Did it look like it was a very populated village?
Well, not a very large village, but, you know, certainly it was a number of families resident there.
Yeah. So I think that for me, the trip up here today was really just to experience the place. But you know, there are monuments, so you kind of get caught up in the monuments a little bit, I think. But I think that I'm going to look forward to just a few minutes of just kind of quiet time and sort of absorb the frequency of the place. And then we brought a couple of things that we might leave behind. I don't think they qualify as literary.
No.
Okay. So we'll be back. It's very difficult for me to imagine my sixth great grandfather Jeremiah Moulton coming up this river with the idea to capture Father Rail and to perform a massacre on a village of Native Americans. It's kind of unimaginable, but I know it's a lot of other people's experience too. And a lot of people in New York are related to Jeremiah Moulton also, and we share that. And I don't know quite how to reconcile it, or I don't know how to come to terms with it. It's just something that exists in my mind that, like, wow, I had ancestors that actually did this to people. And, you know, it was a concerted effort, and people thought they were doing the right thing at that time. In hindsight, it seems to be reprehensible. And then when you talk to other people and they put it in a different context, it was just justification. And so it becomes diminished in many people's minds. That's really, it's confounding. So that's where I am with it. I'm just kind of like, wow, this is really perplexed. There's no simple solution here. and how to move forward. What do we do to move forward? And I think it's just through education, reminding people that this place existed. It was an extension of York. It was an extension of York's ambition in a very violent way, where they wanted to own something that was somebody else's, and they wanted just not to have to worry about being attacked, and they felt like they were entitled to that.
Norridgewock, being still the residence of Rails, was immediately marked for destruction. The execution of this enterprise was committed to a detachment of 208 men who were divided into 4 companies, commanded by Captains Moulton, Harmon, Bourne, and Bain. They left Richmond Fort, their place of rendezvous, on the 9th of August, and ascended the river in 17 whaleboats attended by 3 Mohawks. The next day they arrived at Taconic, where they left their whaleboats and a lieutenant with a guard of 40 men. The residue of the forces on the 11th took up their march through the woods toward Norridgewock. The same evening they discovered 3 of the natives and fired upon them. The noted Bomazine, one of them, was shot in the river as he attempted to escape. His daughter was fatally wounded and his wife taken prisoner. From her they obtained a full account of Rails and the Indians at Norridgewock, which quickened their march. A little after noon on the 12th they came in sight of the village, when it was determined to divide the detachment. Captain Harmon led off about 60 men towards the mouth of Sandy River, imagining he saw smokes rising in that quarter, and supposing some of the Indians might be at their cornfields. Captain Moulton formed his men into 3 bands, nearly equal in numbers, proceeded directly towards the village. When near it, he placed parties in ambush on the right and left, and led forward the residue to the attack, excepting 10 men left to guard the baggage. He commanded his men to reserve their fire till after that of the Indians, and then boldly advanced with so quick a step and in such profound silence that they were within pistol shot before their approach was suspected. All the Indians were in their wigwams when one, happening to step out, looked around and discovered the English close upon them. He instantly gave the war whoop and sprang in for his gun. The amazement and consternation of the whole village was indiscriminate and terrible. The fighting men, about 60 in all, seized their guns and fired at the assailants, but in their tremor they overshot them. Not a man was hurt. A discharge was instantly returned, which did effectual execution. The Indians fired a second volley without breaking Moulton's ranks, then flying to the water, fell upon the muzzles of the guns in ambush. Several instantly fell. Some undertook to wade or swim across the river, which at this season was only 60 feet wide and in no place more than 6 feet deep. A few jumped into their canoes, but forgetting to take their paddles, were unable to escape, and all, especially the old men, women, and children, fled in every direction. Our soldiers shot them in their flight to the woods, also upon the water, so that not more than 50 of the whole village were supposed to have landed on the opposite side of the river, while about 150 effected an escape too far into the thickets to be overtaken. Pursuers then returned to the village, where they found the Jesuit in one of the wigwams, firing upon a few of our men who had not followed the wretched fugitives. He had with him in the wigwam an English boy about 14 years of age, who had been a prisoner 6 months. This boy he shot through the thigh and afterwards stabbed him in the body, though he ultimately recovered. Moulton had given orders to spare the life of Rails, but Jacques, a lieutenant, finding he was firing from the wigwam, had wounded one of our men, stove open the door and shot him through the head. As an excuse for the act, Jacques alleged that when he entered the wigwam, Rails was loading his gun and declared he would neither give nor take quarter. Moulton disapproved of what was done, allowing, however, that Rails said something to provoke Jacques, yet doubting if the statement made by him was literally correct. Mogg, an aged and noted chief, was shut up in another wigwam, from which he fired and killed one of the 3 Mohawks. This so enraged his brother that he broke through the door and shot the old Sagamore dead, and the soldiers dispatched his squaw and children. Near night, after the action was over and the village cleared of Indians, Captain Harmon and his party arrived, and the companies under a guard of 40 men took up a lodgment in the wigwam till the morning. When it was light, they counted, as 2 authors state, 27 and a third, says, 30 dead, bodies including Rails, among whom was those of Mogg, Job, Carabasset, Wesemet, and Bomasine's son-in-law, also known and noted warriors. They also recovered 3 captives and took 4 prisoners. It was afterwards reported that they had wounded 14 Indians who escaped. The whole number killed and drowned was supposed to be 80, some say more. The plunder they brought away consisted of the plate and furniture of the altar, a few guns, blankets, and kettles, and about 3 barrels of powder. After leaving the place on their march to Taconic, Christian, one of the Mohawks, either sent back or returning of his own accord, set fire to the chapel and cottages, and they were all burnt to ashes. As I said, it only took a half an hour or so for the whole event to occur. Yeah. I think there had been prior attempts to raid the village, and each instance they hadn't succeeded in their objectives.
Right.
And so they had this added urgency to achieve this time.
Yeah. And I think the village was on the other side of the river previously, right? And Father Rail had gotten moved over here.
I wouldn't be able to say.
I think so. Yeah. Moulton came up here with the intention to create a security for the town of York, I think. You know, like, okay, we'll put an end to this, which they tried to do, like you said previously,
right.
And they were unsuccessful. So now they had this urgency, and they came up, and they're like, okay.
Well, and they had the incentive of the enormous bounties as well, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you can't ignore the fact that that's a huge amount of money.
Yeah.
£100 bounty?
I think the tragedy, one of the great tragedies of this also is that they were, in their eyes, successful, and they pushed the natives away. They pushed them up to the Penobscot area and up to Quebec. And so this place was void of natives, or as far as I know, it was void of natives for a long time after that. So there was no hindrance of natives. And I mean, that's an ethnic cleansing that is unsurpassed, like probably in Maine.
Well, as I said, the War of the 1720s begins because they're resettling those towns that have been abandoned during Queen Anne's War.
Yeah.
And they're land companies, these very aggressive land companies that are taking up tremendous areas of property.
Yeah.
And the natives are increasingly being trespassed upon their tribal territories. And
it was a perpetual genocide. Right up until this point. And
I mean, the natives basically expressed, this hostility towards those trespassing on the tribal territories. They said, if you, bring this under control, there's no reason, no justification for our taking violent action. But if you don't recognize that these are tribal territories, we're going to respond violently, and that's what happened. And I mean, I think you end up being sympathetic with the Jesuit because he's in a terrible situation. He feels responsible for the natives in terms of being their caretaker. He is a Catholic, which makes him extremely vulnerable in terms of how he's going to be responded to by the colonists. And then he's got the other problem of French Canada not wanting to commit to offering military support.
Yeah.
So he's caught in a terrible position, and once they learn that he's in correspondence with the French-Canadian government seeking some kind of support, then already they've demonized him, and they've gone even a further step towards seeing him as committing treason. Right. And once he's seen that way, it justifies any action being taken against him because
the writing is on the wall for him.
Right.
Yeah.
And he's old and he's infirm. He's he's elderly and he's infirm.
Yeah.
And that led to all the difficulties that was going to happen here.
Yeah.
As I said, I do not ignore the fact that it is on the anniversary of King Philip's death in August 12, 1676.
Yeah.
Killing King Philip in 1676 was seen to be the way to end the war, right?
Yes.
So killing the Jesuit was seen the same way as killing.
But it wasn't their intention to kill him. Moulton had the idea that they were going to capture him, take him back, have a trial, and then that would show the other natives that the Europeans were right.
maybe that was the underlying motivation. But when you put a huge bounty on somebody's head, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it gives all kinds of encouragement for somebody knowing that they could earn that much money just by killing him.
Yeah. But if there's a little bit of a saving grace, it is that Moulton didn't intend to have Rail killed. They wanted to take him alive, according to that account and a previous account that I've read.
Well, I'll grant that possibility. You also have to recognize, after it's done, you need to cover what's happened.
There you go.
Right?
Yeah, sure.
You have to be honest about that, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
so we don't know, and we can speculate. And
right.
Either way is...
Well, knowing how easy things could get out of hand.
Yeah.
When they're shooting, in all kinds of directions, how easy things could get out of hand.
And you're confronted with rail. If you're a soldier and you open the door and there's rail reloading his gun,
right.
You've got to make a snap decision.
Right. Well, and you see, when each prior raid had been frustrated by the fact it hadn't succeeded.
Yeah, there's that too.
So they this time said, we're going to succeed with this at this time.
Yeah.
Right? And they were organized in such a way where, they had been able to accomplish that. But I don't know. I really don't know. I mean, it's interesting to think of the alternative historical possibility of him being captured alive.
It is interesting,
right?
Yeah.
I mean, who knows what the outcome would have been? Described.
Right, but evidently the rail had a church. So that was pretty, a foundational aspect of the community.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, when you read, his own description of what his life was like here, he was like a social worker, really. He cared for, the families in terms of what their social needs were, and
evidently spiritual.
And spiritual as well. But he had this sort of role that he played.
Yeah.
And he did feel this great sense of responsibility for them. I mean, I think that's...
but after they succeeded for 7,000 or 8,000 years here, some European comes in under the auspices of Catholicism and says, I can take care of you better than you can on your own.
Well,
that sounds like a contradiction to me.
Yeah, there's that. I think that there's certainly that. But you also, recognize that they're so forward in terms of their geographical location.
Yeah. Oh, well.
Right.
In terms of ideology, Catholic ideology also. So that was his mission. He was a Jesuit. He came here and he was sent down to Norridgewock to help save souls. And that was kind of like he was raised through that.
Yeah.
So that was his thing. But the natives didn't obviously need that. They didn't need somebody to come in and say, hey, I know how to take care of you better than you.
Yeah, I agree. I agree that's true.
Yeah.
That's true.
So that amount of influence might have been to their detriment. I don't know. But they accepted it. And they evidently embraced it.
Well, you see, the other thing is, he'd been doing it for decades. He'd been doing it from, the late 17th century. Yeah. And certainly the length of time that, he'd been doing it, played into how he perceived what he was, doing.
Yeah, he was cultivated in it. He cultivated a place for himself within the native community, and he wrote a dictionary.
Yeah.
And he was invested. I think he must have adored the people.
I think that's right. I think that's the way it comes across. Yeah. I think it comes across.
So it'd be like us befriending the natives now to their own detriment. But we thought we were having an honest relationship with them where that we were empathetic and we admired and appreciated them, and then but it turns out to be to their own detriment. So I can see their trepidation about kind of being friendly with me, because who is this interloper? Obviously I'm not another Father Rail, but I can identify with how I would feel that way too if I had been subjected to
I think the hardest thing in history is trying to look, as possibly with objectivity at each side of a historical issue, right?
Yeah.
In terms of seeing that historical issue in ways where there's no possible bias entering into it.
Well, okay. Good luck with that.
No, I know that's a huge thing to do, but
you think it's reachable?
it's reachable,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
you have to reach beyond
Yeah.
how he's demonized. You have
Yeah.
to reach beyond the way
Yeah.
the colonials perceived him,
Yeah.
and try to understand in terms of, what he thought his responsibilities were, all of that.
Yeah.
I think you're right about somewhat patronizing in terms of assuming that he's sort of the overarching authority of the village. I mean, but who knows? Who will ever know?
James and I decided that we would leave an offering for those who lived and died here. We brought some strawberries and blueberries and placed them on a stone. A native acquaintance once told me this would gratify the native elders, and that was our intention. There is so much to learn and so much source material on Norridgewock. We welcome input and would especially like to hear from Wabanaki people. I guess my question is, what do we want to bring back to York?
Well, what do you mean?
With our trip up here, we've made a trip. I kind of think of it as a pilgrimage in a way.
Yeah, yeah.
And because we were aware of Norridgewock, I've been here once before. I was enthusiastic to come again to share with you and some other people. And now we've done that, and I think it's more reinforced in our consciousness now.
Very much so. Very much so.
Yeah. So what is it that's been sort of like a review of like what we've already talked about, maybe? Like, what is it that we would want other people, that's imperative for other people to know about Norridgewock?
Well, the environment here, is remarkable. It's just very serene. I mean, you hear the river in the background, you hear the birds in the trees. There's so little evidence of human presence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that experience in itself creates a reality about the place that if this was on a bustling Main Street and the massacre occurred there.
Yeah, you feel a solemnity about this place.
Yeah.
It hangs over this place.
Yeah.
Even if you didn't know that something had happened here, there's certain solemnity about this place. Right?
Yeah. And I think that's consistent with what a lot of people say. Yeah, it almost has an inverse, it has a quietude or a sound that's like inverse to what we would expect.
Yeah, it's a very strange environment.
Yeah.
It's hard because when you know the history and you've been familiar with history for such a long time, that to actually visit here changes your whole sense of what the history means.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, and do you think that your being becomes infused with the people that were here before?
I don't know. I mean,
do you think that that's a possibility? It's like
because York is such an integral part to the story, and you think of all the associations you make in York, say of Jeremiah Moulton's gravestone and the burial ground and all of those things.
Yeah,
those two things connect when you're here, and
which you wouldn't have understood could happen.
Right.
Without coming here.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean,
we can tell people, but then there's nothing like the experience of being here, I would say.
All of those individuals, who served in those companies that were here.
Yeah.
I mean, there's such recognizable York names.
Yes. Yeah. That's amazing. They came up this river with these intentions. And here we are in this relative quietude that has a sort of an eerie effect about it.
Well, I mean,
I think that feeling. That's what I don't know what it is. It's a quietude, but it's not something that I've experienced a lot in like similar woods situations. I mean, I'm in the woods a lot, and I sit in the woods and I'm quiet.
But this almost has like to me, in my spirit, it has like a vacuum sort of a feel to it. It's like, I'm not articulate.
Well, I felt something all day. There's no question about that. I felt something all day. And again, it's hard to separate, the historical knowledge from what that feeling is.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. And they should be convoluted. They should be,
because once you start, it's just inevitable. Once you start visiting the site and you've read those contemporary accounts, you can visualize with some degree of reliability something about what happened there.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Right?
Unless we're being totally duped, but I don't think we are.
Right?
Right.
I mean, you're seeing the geography, you're seeing the landscape, and it's so much easier now to think about it than it would have been otherwise.
Yeah.
And it just points out how history is, when you have that opportunity to visit a historic site.
Yeah.
It's never the same again.
Yeah.
It's just never the same again.
Yeah. It's a tangible experience.
Right?
Yeah.
Right? Because you have something to recall.
Yes.
And every time you read about Norridgewock now, this is what will come up in my mind.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. And that's hard to convey that to other people. You'll be saying, "Oh, I've been there." You really need to go there to experience it.
Right. Yeah. It's like an astronaut who's visited the moon. Right?
Exactly.
I mean, the astronaut says, "Oh, the moon. You've got to visit the moon." Well, I don't think I'm going to get a chance to visit the moon, but you can tell me what it's like. But it's the same thing.
But you can sit at your TV and be pretty well enthralled. I guess that's what we're expecting the people that are watching us to feel, is sort of like, "Wow, those guys went to Norridgewock." Maybe our next trip will be to the moon.
Well, I hope just those background sounds are audible enough.
I think they will be.
Right?
Yeah.
I think that those background sounds are audible enough.
Yeah.
It will capture something of what it's like to be here.
Yeah.
And what we're trying to do is describe what we're witnessing.
Yes.
And to give people the sense there's no humanity around in so many respects. I mean, you go down to the river and there's nobody on either side of it when you're looking down one end to the other.
Yeah.
And that, to me, is remarkable enough.
Yeah, it is, yeah.
And there's so few people here now. I mean, we've seen just a few people over the course of the hours we've been here.
Yeah.
So it has this, this solemnity about it.
Yeah.
And, I think it is because it's the anniversary year, and it just stands out because it's the anniversary year. Visiting it on the 300th anniversary year means something.
Yeah.
That
certainly. And so, do you feel like you have a sense of atonement?
I think it comes down to what I was saying at the river. I think the only way to try to understand something is to look at each side's perspective and understand how that happened.
Yeah.
Yeah. To think of these people coming from a community that's been hit by Indian war after Indian war after Indian war, that's lost so many of their family members and so forth, and to realize those types of experiences shape how they see the world. You know?
Yeah.
Right? I
mean, not to diminish the genocidal aspect of that, but there is that reality. You're here so you're born, and you have a family, and then you have to take care of that family. So
I told you. I mean,
you do the best you can.
Jeremiah Moulton lost both his parents.
Yeah.
Right?
In front of his own eyes.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's hard for a child of that age.
Yeah.
First of all, he's at such a young age that he's really dependent upon his parents in ways that he wouldn't be if he was older. And he's lost both of them.
Yeah.
And,
so
we can't comprehend what happened to him. We can't.
No.
I mean...
and so I think that sort of like begs the question.
Right.
It begs the question, are people is land private? Can people own it to the exclusion of other people? And can people protect it with their lives? And so when he was here, he thought he had those covenants on that land, that it was his private land, and New York was his home, and he could protect it. But it was at the exclusion of those people that owned it in a more legitimate natural law sense. So he was at odds with that, with like natural law, but then he wasn't really, because he was a human being that was trying to do the best that he could with what he had. And he was protecting what he thought he was entitled to because of the law at the time.
Yeah, I mean, when you dehumanize your enemy and you can't see your enemy in terms of having a legitimate voice in terms of what they're seeking to convey, and the emotions get so strong and completely obscure,
Yeah, and then he adopted Patient Boston's daughter.
Yeah, he did. There's fascinating evidence of a man who, I think the best example I can think of is at the time of the Wiscasset murder case, where, in the winter of 1750, he's placing all of these guards on the jail, knowing that he's, preventing any effort to rescue the men who murdered the Indians.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And he did adopt, Patience Boston's. I think to be fair to someone like that, I mean, I think they're in conflict over what they how they deal with things.
It would have been likely.
I mean, dealing with so many of kindred and individuals he knew in town and what they had gone through, and I just think that you have to take all that into consideration. And that oversimplification about he's driven by vengeance and that type of thing, I don't think that's an accurate way to look at it. I think it's it's a town that's been impacted so many times and lost so much to the Indian Wars and to the French involvement in the Indian Wars. And they see, their enemy in a certain way, and they respond to that enemy. And again, we have to go back into time, into their mind, to understand any of this, right?
But that seems to be the culprit. That seems to be the underlying evil force. It's entitlement, supremacy, domination, Catholic Church, Papal Bull, all of that stuff. It takes us right back to saying, okay, we dehumanize people that are not Christians, and we are entitled to their land at all costs. And so that's the foundation. And then so, York builds from that. And so that's the hard part to reconcile. For me, that's the hard part for me to go, oh yeah, well, this makes sense because it was part of the Papal Bull. I would dispute that.
It's so integral to the.
It is.
It's so integral to the colonization of the Americas
and to survival.
Right.
Survival. It's actually, if you don't believe that, then you would desist. You would leave. You would say, okay, I came here. I got a grant. The Indians didn't want me there, so I'm just going to leave. And I wonder if people actually did that. We don't know of any accounts of that, do we?
No, I'm trying to think of any documented instances of that. I mean,
they usually resolved it with some sort of a deed or something.
It's very hard. It's really, I think that I feel a greater mystery about it than.
Yeah, that's where I'm at.
Yeah, a greater mystery about it.
So I think that would be my takeaway is that we're left with even a bigger mystery after coming up here. And I don't think there's any action that I can take other than to share what we've experienced with people and let them, decide and make up their own opinions about it with what information that we can share.
One of the things that is amazing is it is like reaching into an aspect of York history here that you can't reach into in York.
You got it. So that's it. So that's what I'm about with the mural.
Yeah.
You just articulated it.
You know, there's something about here
Yeah.
that really reaches in.
It does,
right?
James, yeah.
Right? It reaches really into something.
Yeah.
And you feel it.
Yeah.
You really feel it.
Yeah.
You know, that's probably the most remarkable aspect of being here.
Yeah.
Is you really feel something that you don't feel anywhere else.
I think it's so unique to this place.
You know, I suppose it's like visiting. I can think of a number of historical sites. I'd be like visiting Custer's Last Stand.
Oh yeah,
right?
yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
you can't visit Custer's Last Stand without conjuring up what happened there.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
You almost. This is one of the cases where you are so close to imagining what the sounds were like.
Yeah.
The sounds almost come back to you.
And they do here too.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, the wildness of things.
Yeah.
You know, people shooting in all kinds of directions,
Yeah.
people screaming for their lives as they're running off and caught completely by surprise. All that sense of chaos, you know?
Yeah.
So you come to this tranquil environment here that, you know, is tranquil 3 centuries later, but then you think of the chaos at one point that happened here.
Yes.
And I think it's like that at so many battle sites, you know.
Yeah.
You visit Gettysburg, you know,
Yeah.
and you come to these quiet places at Gettysburg, and you realize, you know, 160 years ago or whatever, the terror that the individuals experienced when they were here. And I think that's what you feel.
I think it is.
I think that's what you feel here.
And then the more transformative it was, perhaps the greater the feeling.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this was a very so, you know, not to minimize the amount of people killed here, and I think the native account is much higher than the 80.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
But it's bad enough. But like, if it was 10,000 people, we would have probably had even a different feeling. I'm just speculating that we would probably feel differently if we knew 10,000 people had been murdered.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. Like I haven't been to a Holocaust. I've been to the Holocaust Museum in D.C., and that is
the amazing thing about history. Time and time again, so you learn something in history. And you read it many times, and then you visit the site, and whether it be a historic house or a particular outdoor historic site, you visit the site, and it's very different because you know the dimensions for the first time. You know that what you had perceived as what you thought was what was true isn't true.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, you visit that site, and you will always be thinking of what you observed and trying to understand.
Right. It's like an awakening.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that the best that possibly could be said is that to leave this place is to have less certainty about the history than when you came here.
Yeah. I think so.
And sort of acknowledging the fact that you live 3 centuries away, and you're entirely dependent upon what's written to interpret something.
Yeah,
right.
That's amazing too, and that makes me want to tell people to keep a diary, a journal, account of your life, because nobody else is going to do it for you.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah,
I agree.
Yeah. All right, James. So we're ready to head back to York then.
Okay. Back to the hometown, right?
We got some different feelings down there. Yeah. Today is May 15th, 2024, and I'm with James Kences, and I'm Kevin Freeman. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, okay.